This is the New York Living Health Report.
Many see binge drinking as a phase, something teens and young adults will eventually grow out of, but getting to that point can be a struggle. New York One's Aaron Billups takes a closer look in today's health report.
It's about 20% of kids start drinking between 9 and 13 years old.
Marianne Chai, the medical director for the New York Center for Living, works with Siobhan and other patients ranging from 13 to 26 and their families, helping them gain control over their addictions.
At first, it was kind of just a social thing. Like, whenever I went out, I was like, okay, I have to drink because everyone else is drinking.
But it quickly became a problem for then 14-year-old Siobhan. She's been sober for about 3 months after 3 years of binge drinking. Her struggle with alcohol is a familiar story, often brushed aside as a phase kids go through. Binge drinking remains a major problem in the U.S.
Their brain is profoundly affected. We know that memory centers are affected and learning centers are affected. And that these changes, the longer they go on, the harder they are to reverse.
An important part of treatment and recovery for Siobhan was recognizing and addressing alcoholism as a disease.
The news is now.
Your teenagers may be playing fast and loose with something very risky. Some call it a myth, but the experts we spoke to say this one's for real, and it's certainly no joke because it could be deadly. Here is Dr. Steve Salvatore with more.
Vodka tampons. It's not known how widespread the practice is, but it's all over YouTube.
It's when a tampon is soaked in an alcoholic beverage and then inserted inside the vaginal canal.
So peer pressure, no matter the danger. And according to Dr. Marianne Chai, a child-adolescent psychiatrist and the medical director at the New York Center for Living on Manhattan's East Side, it is dangerous.
People get intoxicated a lot faster because it's absorbed directly into the blood system through the vaginal canal, which is lined in mucosal membrane.
Teenage years are a time when kids are testing their limits, but you might not know the lengths they're going to get drunk.
Live, this is News 4 New York.
Warning for parents tonight as your kids start to deal with back-to-school stress.
Here at the New York Center for Living, Dr. Jill Backfield says the beginning of the school year means parents must be educated in not only trends, but techniques on how young people try to keep their drugs under the radar.
Kids also have very novel ways of hiding drugs in the house. I've seen drugs in lipstick tubes. I've seen it, hidden in electronic equipment.
Helping local families heal from the destruction of addiction, Dr. Backfield says kids are getting ideas for new possible highs, not only from their peers, but social media.
Now on News Talk Radio 710 WOR, it's the Joan Hamburg Show.
Welcome to the Joan Hamburg Show. Over the weekend, there was supposed to be a music festival, the Electric Zoo, and it was shut down because a young woman and a young man died after taking Molly, and it's a form of ecstasy. We reached out to the New York Center for Living. I'm sure in your center you deal with this all the time.
Unfortunately, it's extremely prevalent, and it's gotten the reputation of being a relatively harmless drug, and it's not. It's a very serious hallucinogenic. It's in the amphetamine class, and it's very often mixed with other drugs, and these kids have no idea what that mixture is, but it's never pure.
Rachel, when you deal with patients at the center, they think they're impervious to all this.
Of course they do. It's a developmental stage. They don't understand because they can't. They haven't had the life experience. It's really the parent's responsibility to bring that home. You're not curtailing personal freedom. You're really potentially saving your child's life.
From the New York Center for Living, which deals with these issues every day professionally, I'm Joan Hamburg.
So your center is an outpatient center, the New York Center for Living. A lot of people talk about rehab and they think of an inpatient type of situation. What's the difference, and who would be a candidate for one versus the other?
Sure. The candidate for an inpatient setting is someone who needs detox or detoxification. They are very recently using drugs. They need to get those drugs and alcohol out of their system. That's a medical issue. They need to be observed very carefully. There are all kinds of things that can happen at that point from a physiological point of view that's very dangerous to the individual.
But, a lot of people say, well, if my kid was doing that, I'd be all over them. I'd be like monitoring everything they do. Where do you draw that line between, being on top of them and then being so on top of them that you're pushing them away and you're making things worse?
Well, it is a fine line, but it's. I say it's in the job description of a parent. In order to be, if you're going to err on one side, err on the side of a little bit too much closeness. At the New York Center for Living, we are a family recovery center. We believe that addiction, which is a disease, we follow a disease model of addiction, we believe that it's a family problem. And so we require the family to sit down and talk about what's going on, what the consequences of the addiction is for the entire family as a system.
They have to know how to handle this thing properly, because otherwise they can cause problems themselves. Dr. Backfield, thanks so much for coming in. I really appreciate it. And for more on the New York Center for Living, log on to our website, pix11.com. Francis Kirsten.
Live from Studio 3C in Rockefeller Center, this is News 4 New York. Also ahead, teens and adults getting high right out in public. No smell, no smoke. No one can tell.
Dr. Marianne Chai is an addiction psychiatrist in Manhattan. She says vaporizers are helping kids hide their drug habits. E-cigarettes, which don't emit smoke, just vapor and hardly any scent, have been aggressively marketed as a healthier alternative to smoking tobacco. But more and more people are finding other uses.
If you're a parent looking out for your child, you're probably a little nervous about this. You could look for bleary eyes, you could smell their clothes, breath changes, and this makes it a lot harder to detect.
Which is why State Assemblywoman Linda Rosenthal sponsored a bill that became law to keep e-cigarettes out of the hands of kids.